Hi everyone, it's Laura Kleber with My Home Matters, back to show you how I made these yarn snowmen. Since you liked my gnome video so much, I decided to try something else. You need 3 to 4 colors of yarn, depending on whether you want to make a scarf or not. 3 of those colors I used more of along the lines of like a 1/4 inch thick in terms of thickness for the yarn, and then the orange was on the thinner side for the nose. Then you need scissors, a hot glue gun, and glue sticks, some kind of plastic toiletry container that's the same, the opening is the same size as the rest of the bottle that you can remove the lid from to use for the hat. Or I used a Dixie Cup, a plastic one. I would not use paper. I'm not sure if it would hold up. And then I used a drywall anchor to wrap the orange yarn around to make the nose. So the first thing I did was figured out what I wanted to use to wrap the yarn around. And I figured out that a magazine wasn't quite long enough. So I grabbed this scrap piece of wood that happened to be 16 inches long. It might have been just a little too long. So I would say something that's about 14 to 16 inches long, whatever you can find. And I held the yarn at the bottom of that piece of wood with one finger and wrapped it around long ways 40 times. So you'll see the piece of wood a little better in a second because I know you can't see the whole thing. There you go. So I wrapped it around 40 times, again, holding the end of the yarn at the bottom of that piece of wood while I did this. And then when I ended at the bottom of the piece of wood as well. If you have 40, 41, 39, it's not that big of a deal. That was just what seemed to work out best after I did 2 tries of this prior to this final video. So once you have 40-ish wraps, slide that off of whatever you used, cut another piece about the same length as that, and lay everything over top of that string in the middle and tie a double knot right around the middle. What you're going to do is start to form the bottom of the snowman. So I folded everything in and kind of just try to straighten all the kind of comb the yarn a little bit to make sure that it wasn't too twisted. And decided about how big I wanted that bottom snowball to be, and cut a piece of string and tied a double knot again around to form that ball. Then I cut another one and made a much smaller ball at the top. So I have a lot of excess yarn here, as you can see, but I did that because the first 2 times I had a couple of pieces that were just a little too short and did not get caught by this string that I'm tying now. So I'm tying another string in a double knot, not that far up from the other one where I did it across the middle. The top ball is going to be much smaller than the bottom one. And as I tie this, I want to make sure that all those pieces that are sticking out at the top are caught within that knotted piece of string. I don't want any of them to fall out. So there's a couple that are on the shorter side. I'll try to show you that here in a second. But for the most part, I have way too much of all the other pieces. So you can see how the top one is much smaller than the bottom. So I made sure that all those pieces were kind of pulled through all the way through that top string that I tied in a knot. And there you can see there's a couple small ones right there. I just pointed, there's another one. So those are in there well. So it's kind of a shame that I'm going to cut all of this off, but it was the only way that I could kind of get it to work for sure, was to make it a little extra long. So I'm trimming off all of that excess first so that I have as little as possible up there in terms of the sprouts coming out of the top, but enough that it's not going to come back through the piece of string that I just tied to form that top snowball. So I'm trimming it down. I want to have, at least enough still left that when I put the hat on, I can stick all of that up through into the hat and hide it and have enough for the glue to adhere to. So for now, he's just going to have kind of a wild hairdo, but trimmed down enough so that when I get to the hat and attaching the hat, it should work. And once again, I'm just kind of double checking that all those pieces of string are caught and tied in there nicely so that they don't come back through accidentally. And then I check, since I'm going to be using the Dixie cup on this one, I think my little plastic container is a little bit too small. I just wanted to make sure that that's all going to fit in there. And it looks like it will. So I toss all of that excess hair, if you want to call it hair. And then what I did was the Dixie cup itself is just a little bit too tall. You may not feel that, but I felt like he was just a little bit too tall. If you don't feel comfortable cutting this bottom little section off, then by all means leave it. It'll just be a little bit taller. So I took, I want to say maybe like 3/8 of an inch. I cut that much off of the bottom. It's a shame to do that because you have a nice little rim around the bottom, but I felt like I wanted it to be just a little bit shorter, not quite so tall. And if you use a plastic container, you want to turn it upside down and get rid of the lid as mine goes flying. But that's another option, and that's what I did on the very first one I tried that does not have a black hat that you see on the completed one there. I was just trying to do a test run, and I ended up wanting something a little more substantial, so I needed a bigger hat. So the first thing I did was took the black yarn, and I just started trying to very carefully form a concentric circular ball, I guess. Not a ball, but flat in concentric circles, starting with, the very center so that you don't have too big of a hole in the center. You want to try to pull it as tight as you can. Work that around as much as you can. Make it as big as you can until you can't really hold it anymore. And then put a dollop of glue about that big on the top of, well, I guess it would be the bottom of the Dixie cup, what would be the top of the hat, so that you can press that down and get it started. So as close to the center as you can. And then I just started gradually adding a little bit of hot glue around so that I could continue making concentric circles all the way around and around and around till I get to the edge of the top of the hat, and then I would work my way down the sides. Just be very careful because you're trying to hold this cup and not burn yourself, and hold the yarn, loosen the yarn up so that you get more. Just be careful about burning yourself. Not burning yourself, I should say. So now that I have kind of gotten past the top of the hat, I'm just doing the same thing and working it all the way down. You may find that the plastic Dixie cup, if that's what you're using, sort of starts to warp a little bit, but the more you continue to work, the more you kind of can just sort of fudge it and get past that. So I worked it down all the way as far as I possibly could, and when I covered all of the white for the cup, then I just started adding hot glue around the bottom-most ring, and then I just kept going around that same bottom ring, maybe bottom 2 rings, but as much as I could get, it to grasp on, I tried to extend that bottom ring out wider and wider until I felt like it looked like it had that, bottom brim of the hat. And then I just had to make a decision when I was going to stop, put a little bit of glue there, and very carefully press the last little piece in so that it would stay. And that became my hat. Now, once all that glue is dry, I, again, kind of squished all of that excess yarn at the top in as much as I could. And then I wanted to get all of that inside the opening of the hat that I just made. So I kind of squish it all together and then try to shove it all up in there without it kind of getting, some of the little strands getting stuck, you know, on the outside. So once I made sure all of that was in, and the hat was covering it all, then I just kind of pulled back a little section in the front and then the back and squirted a little bit of hot glue in there to make sure that it stayed attached. I kind of, you want to try to squish it in there or squirt the glue in a little bit farther up so that when you press down to get it to stick, the glue doesn't squish out right, you know, where you're going to want to be looking at the face, or put the nose. So I did the same thing in the front and the back. And that was really enough to hold the hat. You could do it the whole way around if you wanted. Or you could do it on the two sides, and then you don't have to worry about whether the glue seeps out. So then I took a few strands of the red, or whatever color you decide for the scarf, and I took the 3 strands together, tied them in a double knot, just to get something to attach to the table. I wanted to tape it down to the table so that I could braid the 3 strands. So I just took a piece of tape and stuck it down, and then to braid it, I just separated the 3 pieces, and I took the left one over the middle and then the right one over the middle, and then continued to do left over the middle, right over the middle, and then kind of tightening up as I went. And the further down I went, I realized that it kind of helped to keep my finger on where you see that I keep going up and fixing it. So if I keep my finger up there, for the most part, it kind of keeps it tight enough that I don't have to keep going back and tightening it up each time. So I did that until I felt like I had enough. It was probably about a foot worth. It doesn't really take a whole lot. I wanted to be able to wrap it around and tie it in at least 1 knot, maybe 2, for his scarf. So it was about it here that I figured I have gone far enough. So I, again, tied a double knot where I wanted it to end, and then I trimmed off the excess. So I had a little bit of fringe on each end to work with, and I just tied it around, made it a scarf. Now for the nose, I took one of these drywall anchors and a toothpick, and I kind of stuffed the end of the yarn. Again, this was a little bit thinner than my other yarns. Stuffed it in there real good with the toothpick just to make sure that it would stay. And then I added just a little tiny dollop of hot glue on the end, again, to make sure that it didn't go anywhere as I was wrapping around this. This was my daughter's idea. I looked high and low throughout this whole house trying to figure out what I had that I could tell you could use for a nose. And you may have some of these drywall anchors in a toolbox somewhere or in a workbench somewhere in the house. So I put a little bit of glue. I worked kind of halfway down so I didn't burn my fingers. Put a little bit of glue on, you know, around the outside of that. And then I just started wrapping so that it stuck. And I wrapped it kind of in a couple of layers to make it a little thicker, because that drywall anchor's pretty thin. And I could have used a bigger drywall anchor, but this was the biggest one that I had at the current moment. But you could use a bigger one if you have it, and then you wouldn't have to wrap multiple layers. So I just kept adding a little bit of glue to make sure that when I wrapped, it was actually sticking and wouldn't come unraveled. And then once I had that half wrapped, I was able to hold on to it to do the bottom half. And when I got down to the tip, I just kind of made sure that I covered it and then went back up, kind of pulled it back up towards the center and then wrapped over it again, and then clipped it off when I got back down to the end, the point, and used some hot glue to just press it in and hide the white. I just did the best I could. It doesn't really have to look perfect. You're just wrapping it the best that you can without burning yourself. And I did forget that when I got to this point, I did use the toothpick to sort of push the yarn into the glue so that I didn't burn my fingers, and then cut off any excess again, or just kind of hit it down, and that could be the bottom of the nose so that you don't see it. So now when it came time to attach, I just put some hot glue where I decided the front would be, the front of his face, the part that I wanted to be the front. And depending on how your hat lays on that top snowball, you could push the nose all the way up against the hat or all the way down kind of against the string that separates the two, or right in the middle. Just kind of play with where you feel like it looks the best. Now for this part, now that I have his, I've tied his scarf on. If you want, you could add some buttons. When I added on my sample piece that doesn't have the black hat, I added the buttons, but I'm not sure if I'm gonna do that again, because you kind of have to pick one strand of yarn to put them on, or else group a bunch together. Now this one is not much, but smaller and doesn't have as much substance to it as these two. They've kind of progressively gotten a little bit bigger as I've done the three, but I wanted to give like something to his hat. And I noticed that this little piece that I cut off from the making the scarf, I had tied it and I made it shorter, so I cut some more off. And in looking at this, since it's tied in a knot there, I thought I'll just even this out. So basically it's really just like if you were to take 1, 2, 3 little strands of yarn, and then this one's not long enough, but if you had a piece long enough, then just like we did earlier, lay those 3 pieces down, take another piece, tie a knot in the middle so that you have the 3 strands sticking out. I'll show you with this orange. 1, 2, 3. Then I would take a 4th one, lay those 3 strands over top of the 4th one as evenly as I can, tie the 4th strand, if I can get a hold of it, in a knot. Should have made it a little bit longer, like that, and you could double knot it. But then you could just even them out on the sides like that, and you kind of have a little bow. So that's what I was thinking when I saw this. So I think I'm gonna kind of tack that onto his hat like that. But I also swiped, you could just swipe a little piece off of something somewhere if you have any greenery. I just kind of swiped just a little teeny piece off of something that I had. So I think that's going to go behind. In fact, I might take 2 pieces. So I think I'm going to go ahead and put a dollop of glue there to get that started. Press that in, and then I'll hurry up and kind of come from behind here and insert the green wherever you feel like it looks best. But that gives you just a little bit of embellishment on his hat. And there you have it. Ta-da! And if you want, you could go back. If the glue coming through bothers you back here, you could go back and you could kind of cover it up, or you could take a Sharpie if it's black and kind of try to go over it. But I think it kind of adds to giving it sort of a little bit of a snowy feel. So enjoy. I'd love to see your finished products if you do one based on this tutorial. As always, we would really appreciate your follow over on Facebook at My Home Matters LLC. We go live every Friday there, doing a Friday feature. And on Instagram, you could follow us at my_home_matters. It's the same on Pinterest. Please hit that like bell for this video and subscribe to this channel. We would really appreciate all the support. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time.